The 6-year-old girl lay somewhere under the collapsed wall, weak and terrified, clutching a dirt-smudged stuffed rabbit to her chest like it was the last warm thing in the world. She didn't cry. She had cried until her throat was glass and her lungs were thunder. Now she whispered to the rabbit the way other children whispered to nightlights. "Don't go. Don't go. Don't go." Her name was Ivy, and the world above her smelled like smoke and wet concrete. Rain hissed through the shattered roof, a summer storm that had rolled in with ugly green skies and a siren-studded wind. Not a tornado, they would say later, just a violent squall line that punched the old neighborhood in the ribs. Somebody claimed the gas line had already been cracked. You could smell it for weeks. And the storm gave it a match. The 2-story brick walk-up, where Ivy and her mother rented Unit 2B, was now a half-collapsed lung, wheezing smoke and small fires studded with rebar like ribs. Across the muddy street, a county search and rescue truck fishtailed to a stop. The door flew open and Sergeant Daniel Rourke hit the ground running, breath steamed by adrenaline, eyes flicking over the debris the way a medic reads a heart monitor. At his side leapt Tango, a sable German shepherd with a scar notched across one ear and a silver tag from a service he'd already given too much to. Tango didn't wait for orders. He lowered his nose to shattered gypsum and split wood, tasting air in sips, translating chaos into direction. Daniel's hands shook, always the first 10 minutes, always in storms. Thunder called old artillery out of the attic of his brain. The collapsed wall looked like an alley from a city he'd promised not to remember. He placed his palm on Tango's shoulder and let the dog's certainty bleed through skin to bone. "Easy," he said to himself as much as to the dog. "We're here now." A firefighter captain shouted something about hotspots and a crawl space. Daniel nodded, barely hearing, already scanning for the easiest angle in. He had that look that made people step aside, even when they didn't know why. The look of a man who didn't just hope someone was alive. He expected it, insisted on it, made space for that possibility with his body. Tango stopped so suddenly the leash went slack. The dog's ears cut forward, nostrils quivering, head tilting toward a void where an exterior stair had sheared away. The floor above had pancaked, leaving a low triangle space, just bigger than a coffin turned sideways. Tango pawed once, then lay flat, nose pressed toward the gap, tail thumping with restrained urgency. He whined, a sound tuned to a single frequency. "Here." Daniel dropped to one knee. "Sound off!" "Search team!" he called into the darkness. Silence. And then, like a secret, decided to trust the air. A voice, small as a moth wing, raw as a skinned knee. "I waited." Daniel leaned closer, heartbeat accelerating into something fierce and focused. "Hey there!" "My name's Daniel. I'm with rescue. I'm going to get you out." "What's your name?" A long breath, trembling at the edges. "Ivy!" Tango wagged his tail once, then went still. Daniel swallowed. "Hi, Ivy." "I hear you. Is anyone with you?" A pause. He could hear rain pinging on bent ductwork, the creak of settling weight, distant shouts. "Just me," she whispered. "I waited, but no one came." Tango whined again, softer, as if answering her from the other side of the dark. Daniel's throat constricted. He forced his voice into calm. "We came. I promise. Do you feel hurt anywhere? Can you wiggle your toes?" Another pause and then a muffled rustle. "My leg's stuck. It's heavy. And it's dark." The last word broke on a sob she strangled half-born. "Okay, don't try to move. I'm going to slide a light to you. It's small and won't hurt. Can you hold a light, Ivy?" A whisper of yes. He pulled a penlight from his vest, wrapped it in a strip of gauze to dull the glare, and fed it slowly into the gap. Tango backed up half a step to give space, nostrils flaring as he tracked the line of air the light cut through. The beam found a dust-veiled face, dirty cheeks, wide eyes, a film of tears, and a stuffed rabbit clenched white knuckle. The rabbit wore a tiny scarf with daisies stitched along the edge, somebody's careful time knotted into comfort. Daniel's mouth twitched at the corners. "That's a brave rabbit." "He's called Button," Ivy said, and there it was, the slightest lift of her voice at the syllables that meant home. Another figure pounded up, skidding on wet brick. Lena Park, a social worker attached to disaster relief, neon vest over rain jacket, braids soaked. "What you got?" she asked, already kneeling, already tilting her head to let Ivy's voice reach her ear. 6, maybe, Daniel murmured. "Leg pinned." "Breathing okay." No adult voices. Lena's jaw set. There was a mother registered in 2BER, just reported a woman from the scene, unconscious, no ID yet. Her eyes flicked to Daniel. They both knew what yet could mean. "Copy," Daniel said. His hands had stopped shaking. "We make the void bigger." "Cut here, Shaw here. Tango's telling me the air's stable for the moment." From the far end of the block, Sheriff Cole Wynne shouted about a propane cylinder and somebody's generator sparking in a backyard. Dr. Anika Patel, a compact ER physician with storm hair and hawk eyes, arrived with a trauma kit slung crossbody and knelt by Daniel like they'd trained together. "Vitals." Voice strong, pupils reactive by penlight, trapped lower extremity. "Get me an airway kit and saline," she told a firefighter who hovered just long enough to be conscripted. Then, softer, leaning into the gap. "Ivy?" "I'm Dr. Patel. I'm very good at helping scared kids breathe easy. I need you to play a game. With me. Match me. In for 4, out for 6. Can you do that?" A tiny nod in the penlight's halo. The doctor breathed, and the girls' breaths matched, a fragile duet in pale blue gloom. Tango lay sphinx still, but his gaze cut to Daniel's face and then up to the busted door above, where wind banged something loose. Daniel followed the dog's look. A door swung on one hinge like a pendulum. Each slam of wood on jam made him flinch. Slamming doors were gunfire in his body's dictionary. He swallowed bile and signed with 2 fingers. A firefighter scrambled up and wedged the door with a Halligan. "Tell me about Button," Daniel said, keeping his voice in the pocket between casual and reverent, like you'd talk about an altar. "He looks tough. He was Mommy's when she was little. I found him in a box, and she said he could be mine. He has a pocket." Ivy patted the rabbit's chest with a small, proud motion, then winced when something tugged her leg. "A pocket?" Lena echoed, easing closer. "What does he keep?" "A picture," Ivy whispered. "Only mine." "May I see?" Lena asked, and her voice was a gentle invitation, not a demand. A small hand worked in the shadow, came back with a coin-sized photograph, edges scuffed, a flash of 3 smiling faces compressed into a circle. Stormlight skated over it and gave Daniel enough to see. A young woman with wind-tangled hair, a man in fatigues with his cap backward and eyes like trouble you wanted to follow, and a toddler, baby cheeks, dimple, fierce enough to split rain. "That's Daddy," Ivy said. "They say he's dead." "But Mummy said, sometimes papers tell lies when people want your money." Daniel absorbed that, a slow, muted impact against the armored place under his ribs. Lena's gaze sharpened. He wanted to ask who they were. He didn't. Not yet. The void hummed with held breath and the delicate architecture of survival. Dr. Patel touched Daniel's arm. "We need the weight off that leg." "She's fading," Daniel nodded. "Captain?" "Cribbing ready." "Ready," the captain barked. "We'll shore along the beam and jack the joist a hair." "Do it," Daniel said. To Ivy, "You're about to hear some loud scraping. That's us making a safe path. No surprises, okay? Tango will stay right here." "Who's Tango?" Ivy asked. "The bravest dog in the county," Daniel said, and Tango tipped his head as if to acknowledge the flattery was accurate but not helpful. He pushed his nose toward the gap until his whiskers touched Ivy's knuckles. She giggled, a wet, hiccuping sound that cut Daniel in the soft places. The girl would trust the dog before she'd trust him. That was fine. Tango was the reason he still trusted anything. The cribbing went in like a hymn, measured, repeatable, learned by heart. Wedges and blocks, taps and shudders, careful pressure to move weight from bad to good. When the jack engaged, the whole building seemed to inhale. The beam rose a quarter inch, then half. Dr. Patel slid her gloved hand into the newly born space and touched skin with a murmur that transformed the air. "There you are." Ivy's breath hitched. The doctor pressed a hand to her shin. "Almost." One more breath in, one more out. Daniel fed a rescue sling under the trapped leg the way you slip a letter under a door. Tango's ears pricked at the whine of the jack, an old mission's music tilting toward this one's hope. "Now," Daniel said. They lifted together, the world flexing, the jack singing, the cribbing holding like faith. Ivy cried out, a raw sound that Daniel wanted to catch in his hands and set down someplace softer. Then the leg was free, and Dr. Patel's voice went warm with triumph. "I've got you, kiddo." "You're okay? Can I hold him?" Ivy asked, pawing for Button. "Don't let him fall." "Never," Lena promised, pinning the rabbit gently against Ivy's chest as Daniel widened the void with a crowbar and a taped-up bar of light. Smoke eddied, and the rain's hiss advanced, hungry for what the fire had started. The air changed. Daniel felt it more than heard it. An intake of city breath turned wrong. Tango's nose snapped toward the rear of the building, and the dog's hackles rose 1 delicate centimeter. Daniel froze. "A propane cylinder," the sheriff had said. In a backyard, someone's grill. An ache in Daniel's shoulders became certainty. "Move," he said, voice low but sharpened. "We need to move now." "Secondary ignition," the captain called, already corralling his crew back from the flanks. Tango whined, urgent. Daniel didn't wait for the physics to argue. He slid into the gap, belly to plaster, shoulders folding, elbows finding ancient angles, learned under trucks and in 2 hot rooms in 2 far countries. "Ivy, I'm right here. I'm going to lift you, and it's going to hurt because the world is mean sometimes, but then it will be better. Hold Button. Don't let go." Small arms wrapped around his neck. Sweat and dust gritted his cheek. He felt the rabbit's ear brush his face, the faint smell of something like laundry and cinnamon buried under smoke. "On 3, he said. 1, 2. The explosion didn't arrive like fire. It arrived like pressure, an invisible fist through the building's gut, rolling heat, a base you felt in molar and marrow. The propane cylinder in the yard had found a flame. A fireball punched a window out and shoved a wall. The floor lifted an inch and dropped like a heart, missing a beat. People shouted. Sirens did the bright, desperate thing sirens do. Daniel tucked Ivy against his chest and rolled, presenting his back to the void, covering her head with his helmet, letting cinder and plaster drum a tattoo he'd pay for later. Tango braced against the wall and took the shower of gravel with a warrior's patience, then licked Ivy's wrist when the dust settled enough to find skin. "Ivy?" Daniel's voice was a rasp. "I'm here," she breathed, and he could have wept from the relief that rode in on those 2 syllables. They pulled out of the hole as the firefighters flooded the newborn blaze with white foam. Rain bullied flame, and flame bullied back, and the building decided it would like to be ash today. Please, but men and women with axes and lungs said not yet. Daniel set Ivy on a blanket under a triage tarp. Dr. Patel checked pupils and pulses, murmured numbers that translated to stubbornly alive. Ivy clung to Button and blinked up at Tango with immediate allegiance. The dog lowered himself until his chin rested on the girl's shin, the long line of his back humming with protective electricity. A woman in scrubs sprinted up, breathless. "We've got a name on the mother," she said to Lena. "Renee Moore." "Intubated, taken to county. Smoke inhalation, blunt trauma. There's a note on her chart, next of kin listed as Clint Avery, stepfather to the child." Lena's mouth thinned. "Avery, he's the one I—" She cut off, glancing at Ivy. "We'll talk later." Sheriff Wynn's radio crackled with dispatch stepping on dispatch. Across the street, an elderly man in a soaked cardigan, Mr. Harlan, stood on his stoop, watching, lips moving as if counting prayers. When he saw Ivy alive, he sagged against the doorframe and pressed his fingers to his eyes. He looked like a man carrying a secret that had started out small and grown teeth. Daniel squatted so his eyes were level with Ivy's. He kept his hands visible, palms easy. "You did everything right," he said. "You kept breathing. You held on," she nodded, jarred by a cough. Rain clattered on the tarp above, a sound like a million coins hitting a roof. Are you my daddy?" she asked, not because he looked like her memory, but because he had shown up. The question landed on him with the weight of a sky. "No," he said softly, "but I'm here." Her lower lip trembled once. She tucked Button's ear into the rabbit's tiny pocket, then drew the coin-sized photo out again and studied the soldier's cap, the man's grin, the arm around the young woman. "Mommy said I shouldn't say it where people can hear," she whispered. "She said some people want papers and money. But I think Daddy's not dead." Tango's ears flicked. Thunder padded away toward the river. Daniel felt the world tilt half a degree, just enough to spill a little more story out in a direction nobody had intended. He thought of forged signatures, of pensions that didn't go where they should, of sermons that asked for cash and gave back guilt, of how small towns carried as much corruption as cities, just folded into casseroles and gossip. "Who told you your father was dead?" Lena asked, kneeling on Ivy's other side, voice like a quilt. "Pastor said a letter came," Ivy said, "and Clint said not to ask questions because questions make people cry." Daniel looked at Lena. Lena looked at Daniel. Somewhere, a hinge that had rusted shut for years creaked. A pickup truck rattled to a stop at the police tape. A man in a windbreaker with a slim briefcase stepped out and flashed a smile that didn't travel to his eyes. Clint Avery, if Daniel had to guess, or some emissary from the court of what belongs to me. He whispered to Sheriff Wynne, hands open in the gesture of performative innocence. "Please," Ivy said suddenly, so quiet the word made both adults lean in. She pressed her forehead to Tango's, eyes squeezed shut. "Please don't send me back." Daniel felt Tango's chest fill and empty under her touch, a metronome against fear. He placed his palm on the tarp near Ivy's tiny shoulder, a contact like a pledge on a Bible. "You're safe," he said. "We'll make sure of it." A loud crack from the building made half the street jump. The upper stair, giving up a complaint. A siren, Dopplered closer. An ambulance finally found its way around downed trees. The firefighter captain shouted for a hose line shift. Sheriff Wynne raised his voice over the wind to ask Daniel and Lena to step aside to discuss custody protocols. Ivy clutched Button and whispered, "Only for Tango, maybe for Daniel, perhaps for the rabbit who had pockets that hid truths bigger than his stitches." I waited, but no one came. Tango blinked slow in the rain. "We came," Daniel said, and the words were a promise thick enough to hammer into something load-bearing. The storm slackened into a sulk while the town gathered its rumors and hung them out to dry. Ivy dozed under the triage tarp with Tango's flank warming her shins, the rabbit smashed between cheek and forearm like a second pulse. Dr. Patel had set the leg, a nasty compression bruise without a fracture, and bandaged a cut on her hairline. Every so often, Ivy's eyelids fluttered like a moth testing a window pane. Each time, her fingers sought Button's little scarf until they found the daisies. Lena Park moved like a woman made of 2 parts, compassion, to 1 part procedure. She called in a temporary protective hold, citing trauma, uncertain guardianship, mother hospitalized. Sheriff Wynne signed the emergency order with rain still drying on his sleeves, then squared up to the man in the windbreaker with the briefcase. "Mr. Avery?" the sheriff asked. The man offered a politician's handshake that included the weather, the state of roads, and a tasking at how bad the building codes had gotten. "Clint Avery," he confirmed. "Renee Moore is my wife. The child is my stepdaughter. I'm here to collect her. She's frightened. She needs family." Daniel watched the exchange from a few paces away, Tango sitting at his heel. The dog's ears tilted, attention flicking between Ivy and the adults the way you watch a chessboard, starting to fill with pieces. Daniel's thumb worried the edge of a folded coin in his pocket, a token from a friend buried in sand 13 time zones and 4 calendars away. Under the code, Lena said, stepping forward, the county holds the child until we establish safe placement. The hospital lists Renee in critical. Until she's stabilized, we need to verify who's authorized. Clint's smile grew a second row of teeth. You'll find everything in order. Pastor Gideon Pike can vouch for me. He angled his head toward the church van idling at the curb, a white dove decal peeling on its door. We're a close community, Miss Park, Lena said, and we prefer documents to vouchers. Of course, Clint said, as if the county had pulled a quaint trick. He produced a plastic sleeve of photocopies, a guardianship letter, a durable power of attorney, a consent for minor's care signed in a hand that looked like someone who had practiced forging kindness. Lena held the pages like she would a snake in a museum, carefully, like it had value once, and with an awareness it preferred performance to truth. We'll verify. Clint's gaze slid over her shoulder to Ivy, to Tango, to Daniel, measuring, evaluating, making investments. And in the meantime, Sheriff Wynne said, she stays with us. You can call your pastor, he can call the judge, everybody can shuffle paper. The girl doesn't move, Clint's lips thinned. He glanced at the Dove van, then nodded once, conceding a battle he'd rather pocket than fight in public. Of course, he said, as if he'd suggested it. I'll be nearby. He drifted off to a knot of neighbors to take their temperature and season their concern with his point of view. Poor man, the burden he bears for that woman. Terrible what the county does to families. If only the mother had signed the right forms. Daniel had heard worse in villages where the Book of Excuses used different nouns but the same verbs. Lena exhaled and turned to Ivy. Can I sit? She asked the girl, who nodded, eyes flicking to Tango, as if to ask his permission too. Tango yawned without baring his teeth. Consent granted. I need to ask you some questions, Ivy, Lena said, notebook balanced on her knee. None of them are tests. You can say, I don't know, or I don't want to say. That's allowed. Ivy traced a daisy on Button's scarf with her thumb. Okay. Has Clint ever hurt you? Lena asked gently. Ivy's mouth went still. A sparrow of silence flitted around the tarp and perched on Daniel's shoulder. He didn't move. Tango's breathing deepened, the dog lowering his head until warm fur pressed the girl's shoe. No, Ivy said, and Daniel's ear for falsehood didn't ring. But he hurts Mommy with words sometimes. And he counts money, a lot. He says paper is church and church is paper, and that's how. You help God, she screwed up her face. I don't think God likes paper. Do you remember people visiting? Lena asked. From church? Pastor comes, Ivy said. He brings pies. He tells Mommy to sign so Daddy's blessing can keep feeding the town. He says Daddy was brave, but Mommy cries after he leaves and says, he's not yours to bless. Then Clint gets angry and takes the mail. Lena's pen paused. Takes the mail? He puts it in a drawer, Ivy said, and locks it with a key I'm not supposed to know about. Daniel filed that away with the reflex of a man who mapped rooms by danger. Ivy, he said, keeping his voice low. The photo you showed us, your dad. Do you know his name? Ethan Hale, she said promptly, a child's triumph at possessing an adult syllable. He wore the green clothes. Her eyes cut to Daniel's uniform jacket, the old unit patch ghosted above the pocket. Like you. Daniel's thumb pressed harder into the coin in his pocket. Ethan Hale. A name he didn't recognize, but names had a way of linking arms with other names under the surface. Lena jotted it down. A paramedic ducked under the tarp. We can transport the kid now, he said to Dr. Patel. County Pediatrics can hold her until CPS sorts the rest. We're not bouncing her around on the worst day of her life, Dr. Patel said. If Sheriff Wynne authorizes, she can be observed at the clinic in the municipal building. 3 blocks, secure wing. I can station a nurse outside. Less chaos. Do it, the sheriff said, and post a deputy. They moved like a small, careful parade, Lena with her umbrella tilted over Ivy, Daniel pacing on the other side with Tango filling the space between the two like a living bridge, Dr. Patel up front arguing on a phone with a hospital administrator who wanted checkboxes more than people. The rain dialed itself down to a sullen drizzle. The town breathed in gossip and exhaled it as certainty. On the clinic's third floor, a small observation room held a narrow bed, a rocking chair, and a window that turned the world into a smeared watercolor. Ivy lay with Button nested under her chin. Tango took the corner opposite the door and became a statue. Daniel stood by the glass and watched the parking lot, making shapes out of headlights. Lena called Marco Reyes, an attorney who'd made his bones defending kids no one invited to the Christmas pageant. "Guardianship papers look oily," she said into the receiver. "We need an injunction, discovery on church accounts linked to survivor benefits, and someone to talk to the judge before Pastor Pike does." "I'm already walking up the courthouse steps," Marco said. "Who's the sheriff on?" "Wynne." "Good." "He hates theatre." A door buzzed at his end. "Send me copies." "And Park, keep the soldier close. If he's the bridge to that kid, don't make her cross another." Lena hung up and found Daniel's reflection in the window. "You plan on leaving?" "No," he said, and found it true in a way that felt like a key turning in a lock. Down the hall, a nurse with kind shoulders, Rosa Morales, bent to adjust Ivy's blanket. "You need anything, honey?" Ivy stared past her at the ceiling, where a crack in the paint looked like a river on a map. Her fingers worried Button's scarf. On impulse, that surprised even herself. She slid a nail under a seam where a daisy had come loose and tugged. Thread popped, a tiny zip. Behind the fold of fabric, something scraped her skin, a sliver of plastic, taped there with care. "What's that?" Lena asked, leaning close without looming. Ivy held it out. A small micro SD card, black as a period at the end of a sentence. Daniel's pulse stepped up. He took the card with tweezers from his pocket knife, a habit that had gotten him out of more than one mess, and set it on a gauze square like it might try to run. "Button's pocket," he murmured. "Clever." Lena smiled at Ivy. "Did Mommy hide this?" Ivy shrugged, a tiny, reluctant motion. "Sometimes she sews things and says, 'Church likes to open mail, they don't think of sewing.'" Daniel slid his phone from his pocket, then halted. "No," he said. "If the wrong app phones home, the wrong person knows it woke up." He looked to Lena. "Where's a clean machine?" "Sheriff's office," she said. Air gapped. "Evidence lab." "Let's go," Daniel said, already looping Tango's lead. Lena touched his sleeve. "We don't move her again tonight." "We don't," he agreed. He nodded at the card. "But we move this." They left Ivy with Dr. Patel and Nurse Morales, both women whose competence built a fortress out of thin hospital gowns. Sheriff Wynne met them by the elevator and didn't ask for speeches. He led them through rain-glossed streets to a side door in the municipal building and then down 2 flights to a room that smelled like coffee and old paper. An analyst with a buzz cut and a sweatshirt that said State Champions. 2012 plugged the micro SD into a reader and jacked it to a laptop whose only job was to look inward. Files populated like a constellation, each named for a month and a year, each containing PDFs of benefit notices, check images, letters with department seals, and spreadsheets that traced money like a flood map traces ruin. There were audio files too, conversations recorded in kitchens and cars, voices low and careful. The analyst clicked on one. Pastor Pike's cadence rolled into the room, smooth as honey on glass. "Renee," he said, "the Lord provides through the church. You cannot be expected to manage all this yourself. Sign the transfer, and we'll ensure Ethan's sacrifice continues to bless the community." Renee's voice, taut with a canyon of fatigue. "It was supposed to bless my daughter?" A second voice, Clint's, entered, frictionless. "The church keeps us safe." "You don't want the county sniffing, do you?" The analyst stopped the playback and sat back, eyebrows up. "That's something." Enough for a judge to choke on, Lena said. Marco called then, voice tinny over the sheriff's desk phone. Emergency hearing at 9 a.m. Judge Miriam Keats. Pastors filed to move the child to church custody, pending maternal incapacity. I need exhibits. You'll have them, Daniel said. He looked at the screen, at the neat columns that made suffering tidy, and felt anger ladder his spine. And I need a patrol outside the clinic room. If Pastor's losing his paper grip, he'll go for the girl. I'll put 2 men on the door, the sheriff said. You on point? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Tango leaned against his leg, the old partnership clicking into place like rounds into a magazine. At the clinic, back in the muted hush of white walls and sleepy machines, Ivy stirred. The storm had settled into a faraway purr. Mr. Harlan, the elderly neighbor, slipped into a chair in the corner and folded his hands like a penitent. He wasn't family, but he had been a witness to too much silence, and tonight he chose to be loud by simply showing up. Ivy rubbed her eyes and looked for Button. Tango nudged the rabbit into her arms as if he'd fetched it the way he'd fetched men once from worse holes. She hugged the rabbit and pressed her mouth to his worn ear. Are you staying?" she asked into the fabric. Daniel stood in the doorway, a silhouette carved out of hallway light. For a second, thunder flashed in his skull, muzzle flare and alley fire, and the particular scream of metal when it learns what velocity really means. He gripped the door jamb until the present forced its way back into his hands. "I'm here," he said quietly. Ivy nodded in a way that meant she believed him. She burrowed into the pillow and made herself small enough to fit inside the trust she had just given away. Tango circled once and lay between the bed and the door, placing his body along the line any trouble would have to cross. In the parking lot below, a dove-stickered van idled a moment too long, then slipped into the street's shadows. Above it all, the town's church bell tolled once, a late, misplaced punctuation mark in a sentence that was about to be corrected. It began with a whisper, iris-thin, and ended with the sound a gun makes when a man changes his mind too late. Between those bookends, hinges, rubber soles, and the quiet heroics of a dog deciding the world would move the way he said. Just after 2 a.m, the municipal building slept with the heavy breath of bureaucracy. The clinic's 3rd floor was a tunnel of dim nightlights and the faint beeps that counted victories in seconds. Nurse Morales made her rounds with a mug that said, "World's tiredest angel, Sheriff." Wynn's deputies, Quinn and Massey, sat on folding chairs outside Ivy's door, arguing about high school football like it was an ethics seminar. Daniel hovered at the window with Tango, eyes sweeping the parking lot. He ran through checklists for no reason other than to make order when sleep refused to be negotiated with. Rain had stopped. Pavement gleamed like the inside of a shell. Down the hall, the elevator dinged. Normal, except not. 3 men stepped out, carrying clipboards and wearing volunteer vests. Anyone's eyes would slide off them. They were the kind of men you don't remember on purpose. The first flashed a laminated badge at the deputies. "Pastoral care," he smiled. "Here to pray with the child per Pastor Pike." Deputy Quinn did not stand. He was stubborn on the inside. "Visiting hours are over. Come back at 8. The man's smile did not dim. It just lost its warmth and revealed itself as a light painted on a wall. "Emergency counsel is authorized at all hours." "The county is secular after midnight," Deputy Quinn said, and sipped his coffee. Then the second man moved in a way that proved he did not come to pray. His hand swung low and fast. A can spat. Pepper clouded the hallway with a rusty hiss. Deputy Quinn coughed and fell sideways, clutching for his eyes. Deputy Massey rose, but the third man shoved him into a rolling laundry cart and rode it like a battering ram. The door to Ivy's room bucked once on its hinge. Tango was already in motion. He slid under Daniel's hand before the noise at the door finished being a noise. The dog hit the first intruder at the knees with the force of a sandbag falling from a truck. The man folded with a sound like he'd swallowed a curse. Daniel came behind like the second half of a sentence. He snatched the pepper can out of a wrist. Before the wrist knew its job was over, slammed his palm into a throat instead of a jaw, because throats don't wake up friendly. The second man bounced off the jam and tried for a pocket that held some poor ideas. "Ivy, under the bed!" Lena Park's voice cut the air. She had fallen asleep in the rocking chair and woke like a match. Ivy scrambled, small and fast, button rabbit first, tucking herself into shadow with the efficiency of children whose lives had taught them hiding as curriculum. The third man, startled by the dog now climbing his torso with the casual threat of gravity, swung a collapsible baton. Tango's teeth met fabric and forearm and made conversation of a kind even men who don't listen hear. The baton fell. The man learned to make a new sound. "Stop!" the first intruder coughed, back against the doorframe. He pulled from his vest a folded paper like a talisman. "Court order, emergency custody to the church." Lena snatched it and ripped it cleanly in half. "That's a photocopy of a draft," she said. "If you had a real order, the judge's clerk would have called." "Also, expired. Letterhead. Sin sticks to paper," the man spat, then tried to stand and met Tango's stare. He decided the floor was where he lived now. Sheriff Wynne barreled into the hall with 3 more deputies, eyes already sorted for guilt. Weapons low, commands crisp. The men learned the language of zip ties, which is universal and requires no translation. Deputy Quinn found an open eye with saline and blinked back tears and pride. Daniel sank to a knee, hand on Tango's ruff. The dog's chest heaved, breath hot through his mouth, eyes bright and very alive. Daniel said nothing. Gratitude too thick for vowels. In the hush that followed the first storm, Ivy slid from under the bed and bolted straight into Tango's chest. She held his fur and shook in little quakes that took a while to leave. Daniel lowered his palm to the crown of her head, felt the heat of fear and the pulse underneath, counted both until one slowed. Nurse Morales swore under her breath in 2 languages and fed oxygen to the hallway by opening a window. Lena peeled back the cuff of one intruder's sleeve and held up a cheap plastic bracelet with a dove stamped on it. "Church van," she said. "Greeters team." "Pastor Pike's fingerprints are on this," Sheriff Wynne said, already dialing. "If he's asleep, he won't be for long." Ivy drew back enough to look up at Daniel. "They were going to take me," she said, in a flat voice that did not belong in a 6-year-old mouth. "They aren't," Daniel said. He glanced at the shredded paper on the floor. "They can't." Lena crouched, bringing her face close to Ivy's. "Tomorrow morning, we stand before a judge. We show the truth. But for tonight, you're safe. And tomorrow, you won't stand alone." Ivy nodded. Her gaze moved to Tango. Can Button ride on him?" "Button can supervise," Daniel said, and set the rabbit on Tango's shoulders like a tiny, ridiculous saddle. Tango gave him the side-eye of a professional asked to carry a stuffed foreman, then accepted the mission with dignity. At 9 a.m., the courthouse smelled like disinfectant and coffee you'd drink even if it tasted like a lesson. Judge Miriam Keats presided with the air of a woman who raised 3 boys and 2 dogs and had stopped being impressed by volume. Marco Reyes set the micro-SD card's contents on a legal altar, recordings, ledgers, cashed checks, signatures that looked like they'd learned handwriting from a photocopier. Pastor Pike's counsel objected on principle, on process, on the weather. The judge overruled like swatting gnats. Clint Avery sat at the respondent's table, wearing a tie that had comforted liars before. He smiled at Ivy when she was led in, the kind of smile that says, "Remember the story I taught you." Her fingers found Button's scarf and then Tango's ear in quick succession. Daniel sat behind them, a presence rather than a person, his knee against the dog's ribs, both, steadying both. Lena testified, Nurse Morales testified, Dr. Patel testified with precise mercy. Then the judge invited Mr. Harlan, elderly, hands shaking, to speak as a neighbor. He cleared his throat and told the room about envelopes that arrived, and then did not, about a pastor's car parked late, about a stepfather counting money by the window, the glare on his glasses like coins. Marco saved the audio for last. Pastor Pike's voice, silk on a snare drum. Renee's voice, tired as a worn-out hymn but fierce in the 4 lines that mattered. The judge didn't look at Clint while it played, she looked at Ivy. When Pastor Pike himself took the stand and tried to wrap words around the room like a shawl, the judge lifted her hand and tugged the shawl off a lie. "Enough," she said. "Mr. Pike, charity that demands signatures at gunpoint is theft. Sit down." The gavel came down on paper, and men and intentions. Temporary custody to the county. Visitation barred. Investigation opened. They walked out under a sky rinsed clean, Ivy holding Button like a banner, Tango's tail drawing figure 8s in the air. Daniel's shoulder muscles, clamped for hours, let go a fraction. He breathed and almost tasted relief. He should have known better. On the courthouse steps, Clint Avery slid out of a pillar's shadow like a thought a man swats away too late. He didn't have his briefcase now. He had a mouth full of poison. "You think you've won," he said, voice low. "You have no idea how long the church's arms are." Daniel stepped in, and Tango took that step with him, the two of them making a wall whose mortar was not words. Clint leaned toward Ivy and smiled, not with teeth this time, but with memory. "Your mother should have learned. Papers feed the town. People are nothing without their signatures." Ivy's small hand tightened on Button. Her whisper rose, carrying further than its volume. "I don't want to go back." "You won't," Daniel said, and his voice had that gravity that persuades planets. But that night, while the town pretended to calm, a different kind of storm assembled at the edges, a warehouse near the river with windows like closed eyes, a truck with a door that didn't latch right, a dog who would run until his heart told him what to do, a soldier who would follow a voice through any rubble, starting with his own. And somewhere in a hospital bed, Renee Moore turned her face toward the soft chime of a monitor and began, finally, to wake. The warehouse by the river had always been there, even before it was needed. That's the kind of place it was, waiting, unimportant, until suddenly it mattered. Ivy had never seen it, but she dreamed of it the night after court, dreamt of shadows taller than the doors and the sound of something dripping where no faucet lived. Button, tucked under her chin, didn't banish the dream. He only held the dream's hand so she could walk through it without being alone. Daniel didn't sleep. He had the gift of stillness, not rest. Tango pressed his weight against Daniel's cot in the municipal clinic room, his ribs rising and falling with a rhythm that once meant reassurance in deserts and mountains alike. Daniel's eyes tracked cracks in the ceiling paint, sketching them into maps of places he couldn't name. Each time the air conditioning clicked, his jaw clenched. Triggers lived in machinery as much as in memory. At dawn, Lena returned with coffee that had been brewed by someone who didn't believe in kindness. "Marco's filed for permanent guardianship to the county with preference to foster placement," she said. "It'll keep Clint and the church away longer." Daniel nodded, eyes on the girl still wrapped around Button, the rabbit's ear clutched between 2 fingers. "And then?" "And then we prove Ethan Hale's alive or prove he was murdered for a signature," Lena said. She set her coffee down. "One proof buys her safety. The other buys justice." Daniel wanted to ask which one bought peace, but Tango shifted and whined at the window. The dog's hackles lifted, tail stiff, nose twitching toward the parking lot. Daniel rose instantly, body obeying an alarm older than thought. A van idled across the street. No Dove decal this time, just a panel van, white paint dulled by weather. Its side door was ajar, shadows crouching inside. A camera lens glinted in the gap. When the deputies outside noticed, the van pulled away, tires whispering over wet asphalt. "Surveillance," Daniel muttered. "They're not done." "They never are," Lena agreed, jaw tightening. "We need to move her." This clinic isn't a fortress. They decided Ivy would stay temporarily at a safe house, the sheriff's hunting cabin on the edge of the forest, half forgotten, one road in, no one's daily route. Daniel volunteered without being asked. "She trusts Tango," he said, which was another way of saying, "She doesn't trust me yet, but I'll earn it." By afternoon, the convoy was ready, one unmarked cruiser, Lena's SUV, and Daniel in a county truck with Tango in the back, tongue lolling but eyes scanning. Ivy sat wedged between Lena and Button in the SUV's back seat, hair still matted with smoke, knees pulled up. Every bump made her wince, but she said nothing. "Want to see a trick?" Lena asked softly, trying. Ivy shook her head. Button's scarf was enough magic for one day. The cabin sat among pines that creaked like old men gossiping. Its porch sagged and shutters hung askew, but the lock was solid and the stove worked. Sheriff Wynne stocked the pantry himself years back. Cans lined the shelves like polite soldiers. Ivy peeked inside and whispered, "It smells like trees." For the first time, the whisper wasn't fear. Tango bounded through each room, nose low, reporting in silence. He sat at the back door, gaze fixed on the tree line, until Daniel acknowledged, with a nod, perimeter clear, for now. Night fell like a dropped curtain. The forest whispered with the voices of things that lived unseen. Daniel sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, while Lena coaxed Ivy into bed. Tango curled at the girl's feet like a wolf, tamed only by duty. For a moment it looked like safety. Then the generator down the hill popped. The porch light flickered. Daniel froze. That wasn't coincidence, that was tampering. He whistled once, sharp. Tango sprang up, ears slicing the dark. From the woods came movement, too heavy for deer, too clumsy for fox. Shadows converged, 3, maybe 4. Daniel's pulse spiked, the world tilting into the familiar blur of combat readiness. PTSD blurred into preparation, heart hammering, hands steady. He raised the rifle. "Stay inside!" he barked to Lena. The first figure broke cover, masked, flashlight taped to a bat. Not amateurs, but not soldiers either, mercenaries of faith and greed. Behind him another lugged a canvas sack. "They're here for her," Daniel muttered. Tango launched before the order finished leaving his lips. He hit the first man mid-chest, momentum driving them both into the dirt. The bat flew one way, the flashlight another. Daniel fired a warning shot into the pine above the second man's head. Wood chips rained like sparks. "Next one's yours," he growled. But the third figure flanked, a crash of glass at the back window. Ivy's scream tore the night. Daniel swung, body splitting between porch and bedroom, between soldier and guardian. Lena shouted, "They're inside!" Daniel bolted through the cabin door. Tango disengaged, leaving the masked man groaning, and followed. Inside, the living room was chaos. Shadows, broken glass, Ivy clutching Button and shrinking against the wall. A man lunged, sack open like a net. Tango intercepted, teeth snapping fabric and flesh. The sack dropped. Ivy scrambled, dove under the table. Daniel tackled the last intruder before he reached her, fist slamming into jaw, knee driving ribs. They struggled, knocking over chairs. The intruder pulled a knife, blade flashing. Daniel's training screamed warnings, his nightmares layering over the present. A knife like that had ended a friend once. His vision blurred, sweat freezing into memory. "Danny!" Lena's shout jolted him back. He parried clumsily, slammed the man's wrist against the table until the knife clattered free. Tango pinned the attacker, growls rumbling deep. Ivy crawled out, tears streaking, clutching Button like a shield. Sirens wailed far off, late but coming. The intruders fled, limping and bleeding, dragging one another into the trees. Daniel let them go. Ivy was the only prize that mattered. He gathered her up, heart still battering against ribs, feeling her sobs shake through both their bones. "They'll keep coming," Lena said, voice low, eyes hard. "As long as Pike and Clint have strings to pull, they'll keep." Sending hands, Daniel nodded grimly. Tango licked Ivy's cheek and she clung to the dog, whispering, "Don't let them take me." "Please, we won't," Daniel promised. "Not ever." The sheriff's deputies arrived minutes later, too late for the fight, but in time for cleanup. Reports were filed, broken glass swept, bloodstains noted. Wynne looked older under the porch lamp. "This isn't just about guardianship, it's about money, survivor benefits, insurance, maybe more. The church is the pipeline, and Clint's the valve." Lena held up Button's scarf. stitches frayed where Ivy had found the MSDR card. This card was only the start. Who knows what else Renee hid? "She's still in ICU," Wynne said. "If she wakes, we need her testimony." "If she wakes," Daniel echoed softly. He looked at Ivy, asleep now with Button and Tango curled protectively. Her whisper from earlier replayed in his head, "Don't let them take me." The words weren't just fear, they were a command, binding him as tightly as any oath he'd sworn in uniform. Outside, the forest exhaled, carrying the retreating footsteps of men who would regroup, reload, and return. The night wasn't over. The war wasn't over, but for now the child breathed, the dog stood guard, and the soldier kept his rifle ready. Tomorrow would come with questions and subpoenas. Tonight, survival was enough. Morning arrived brittle, a thin gold line creeping over the pine ridges, as if the world wanted to apologize for what the night had taken. Inside the cabin, Ivy stirred on the couch, Button pressed flat under her chin, Tango's bulk warming her shins. Her breathing had settled into something soft but fragile, like a candle that could gutter at any draught. Daniel sat at the table, coffee cooling untouched, eyes on the doorway. He hadn't slept. He didn't bother lying to himself about trying. The gun oil smell on his hands reminded him of war tents in deserts. The bandage on his knuckle reminded him that the war wasn't overseas anymore. It was here, wrapped in the life of a 6-year-old girl. Lena entered, hair tangled, expression hard. She carried a file box she'd pulled from the sheriff's office. "Marco says we need to show more than shady paperwork," she said. "We need proof of intent, fraud, not just sloppy custody. If we can prove Clint or Pike diverted survivor benefits, the court has no patience, especially with a child endangered." Daniel gestured at the box. "What's in there?" "Mail Harlan kept," Lena said, setting the box down. The old neighbor had quietly intercepted some envelopes, unsure of what to do, afraid of speaking, but unwilling to throw them away. "Half are official notices. Survivors' pension statements. The rest are receipts from the church. Same dates, same amounts." Daniel leafed through, the paper rasping like dry leaves, government seals on one stack, hand-scribbled ledgers on the other. It was almost elegant, the way grief was siphoned into tithe, widow's sorrow converted into donations. "They hid behind God," Daniel muttered. "Always the most convenient cover." Tango lifted his head at the tone, ears pricked, then settled again when Ivy sighed in her sleep. "She doesn't need to know all this," Lena said. "Not yet. What she needs is to believe someone will stand up for her." Daniel rubbed his temple. Belief doesn't stop bullets. That afternoon, Sheriff Wynne arrived with grim news. Renee Moore, Ivy's mother, was still unconscious, but her vitals had improved. There was a chance she might wake within days. "If she can testify, we close the loop," Wynne said. "She can confirm who's been pressuring her, who forged what." "Which means," Lena said, "they'll want to make sure she never speaks." Wynne nodded. Hospitals already had 2 men try to slip in claiming pastoral care. Deputies ran them off, but they'll try again. Daniel stood, chair scraping. "Then I'll sit by her bed until she wakes." Lena raised an eyebrow. "And leave Ivy here?" He hesitated. Tango whined, as if answering for him. The soldier looked at the girl, curled into the couch, rabbit clenched. His instinct was to protect whoever was most helpless, but the truth was, both mother and daughter were targets. "They'll split us if they can," he said. "We can't let them." Wynne stroked his mustache, thinking. "We move Renee under police guard, closer to the courthouse. Safer than the hospital. Meanwhile, Park, you keep Ivy close. Rourke, you're the shield." Daniel accepted without question. Tango barked once, short and certain, like agreement. At dusk, they transferred Renee to a secure wing in the municipal building near where the evidence files lived. Tubes and monitors followed, wheeled by nurses who moved with purpose. Ivy was brought in too, her small hand gripping Daniel's sleeve. When Ivy saw her mother lying still, pale under the fluorescent light, she froze. Button dangled from her other hand, forgotten. "She looks..." Gone, she whispered. Dr. Patel, adjusting IV lines, crouched until she met Ivy's gaze. She's not gone. She's fighting. Sometimes our bodies sleep while our hearts decide what to do. You can help her by talking, by letting her know she's not alone. Ivy crept forward, placed Button on the blanket beside her mother's arm, and whispered, "Wake up. Please. I don't want to go back." Daniel's chest tightened. He saw his own reflection in the glass of the monitor, a man carrying ghosts, and wondered if redemption could look like this, standing guard over someone else's second chance. Later that night, Lena spread the contents of Button's MSDRO on the table, a laptop connected to the sheriff's air-gapped machine. Daniel leaned in, jaw set. One folder contained audio of Clint Avery in conversation with Pike. "The survivor benefits aren't meant for a child," Clint argued. "They're meant for the Lord's work. If she resists, we remind her whose roof she lives under. She's stubborn," Pike replied smoothly. "But grief makes cracks. Keep pressing. One day she'll sign." Daniel's hand clenched into a fist. Tango growled low, picking up his partner's tension. Lena exhaled, shaky. "That's coercion on tape. Enough to start charges." Another file revealed a scanned document, a life insurance policy under Ethan Hale's name, unsigned but bearing a forged witness signature, Gideon Pike. The date was weeks after Ethan's supposed death in combat. "They were positioning themselves," Lena whispered, "even if Ethan wasn't dead." Daniel stared at the screen. "Not dead?" Lena glanced at him. "You heard Ivy? Children don't always lie when they hope. Sometimes they overhear." The room went silent. Outside, the streetlight flickered. "If Ethan Hale is alive," Daniel said finally, "then this is bigger than fraud. It's cover-up." The next morning, Marco Reyes burst in with urgency. "We've got an emergency hearing tomorrow." Judge Keats agreed to fast-track based on new evidence. But Pike's counsel is pushing for dismissal. They'll use every trick. Claims of religious persecution, procedural errors. They might even try to spin last night's cabin attack as staged by us. Daniel shook his head. "So they twist survival into theater." Marco pointed a finger at him. "Which is why you'll testify. You and the dog. First-hand account." "Dog doesn't testify," Daniel muttered. Marco smirked. "Trust me. When a judge sees how that girl clings to him, she won't need words." That evening, Ivy sat in the corner of the municipal wing, Button on her lap, Tango pressed against her side. She whispered to Daniel, almost shy, "Do you dream bad dreams too?" Daniel nodded. "Every night." "Do you wake up scared?" "Yes." "What do you do?" He hesitated. Honesty mattered. "Sometimes I hold on to Tango until I remember where I am. Sometimes I just keep breathing until morning." Ivy considered this, then shifted so her tiny hand rested on Tango's fur. "Then we're the same," she said, and smiled faintly. Daniel looked away, throat tight. Redemption wasn't a medal or a parade. It was a child deciding you were safe enough to share her nightmares. That night, as the town slept, Clint Avery sat in the church office with Pastor Pike. Candles flickered, papers lay spread across the desk. Pike's voice was smooth as always, but his eyes were restless. "She'll talk if she wakes," Clint said bitterly. "Renee and the soldiers in the way. Then we pray for—" "Resolution," Pike murmured. He slid a photograph across the desk. Daniel on the courthouse steps, Tango at his side, Ivy holding Button. Every savior becomes an obstacle. Eventually. Obstacles can be removed. Clint's jaw tightened. He took the photo, folded it once, and tucked it into his coat. The stage was set, a courtroom waiting to decide who Ivy belonged to, a conspiracy desperate to protect itself, a mother fighting her way back to consciousness, a soldier haunted by his own battles, a dog whose loyalty was carved into scars, and a girl with a stuffed rabbit that hid the truth in its pocket. The next day would decide more than custody. It would decide who still had the right to hope. The courthouse smelled like coffee grounds and old varnish, the kind of place where truth and lies rubbed shoulders until someone with a gavel forced them to stand apart. Ivy walked between Lena and Daniel, Button tucked against her chest, Tango pacing close enough that his flank brushed her knee with every step. She looked smaller than ever in the cavernous hall, like the marble and oak might swallow her whole. Judge Miriam Keats presided again, eyes sharp behind half-moon glasses. Marco Reyes stacked exhibits like a fortress on the petitioner's table. Clint Avery sat opposite with his lawyer, smoothing his tie, radiating confidence borrowed from someone else's money. Pastor Gideon Pike filled the bench behind, surrounded by parishioners whose whispers ran like insects under the floorboards. Daniel kept his gaze on Pike. The pastor had that calm, untroubled expression of a man who never admitted to sweating. But when Tango's low growl hummed through the room, Pike's eyelids flickered, a tiny crack, but real. The hearing began with procedure, motions, objections, the usual theatre. Marco introduced the MSDR files, the forged signatures, the audio recordings. "This is not stewardship," he argued. "It is exploitation. Survivors' benefits meant for a widow and her child were siphoned through church accounts." Clint Avery and Pastor Pike used grief as currency. Pike's lawyer rose, smiling like a man rehearsing for television. "My clients merely advised Mrs. Moore in good faith. Any overlap of accounts was administrative error. And as for these supposed recordings, easily fabricated, in a world of digital trickery, who can say?" The judge's brow furrowed, unimpressed. But she allowed the cross-examination. Clint's lawyer called Lena to the stand, pressing her on details. "You claim you witnessed Avery threatening the child's mother. Did you file a police report at that time?" Lena's lips tightened. "No, Renee was terrified of retaliation. So no report, no corroboration, only your interpretation." Lena bristled, but Judge Keats cut in. "Mr. Avery has every right to question, but Ms. Park's credibility remains intact. Continue." Then came the moment Daniel dreaded. The lawyer gestured toward him. "Sergeant Daniel Rourke, war veteran, decorated, yes, but also discharged after PTSD-related incidents, correct?" Daniel stiffened. The courtroom tilted for a breath. He heard a door slam somewhere in the building, and it echoed like gunfire. Tango nudged his leg, grounding him. "Correct," he forced out. "Which means your perception may be compromised. Stress triggers hallucinations, does it not? How can this court rely on your testimony regarding alleged intruders, alleged threats?" The words dug deep, aiming for scars. Daniel clenched his jaw, but Lena caught his eye, nodding once. "Tell the truth." "My PTSD is real," Daniel said, voice steady. "I live with it every day, but what I saw wasn't a hallucination. 3 men broke into that cabin. They tried to take the child. Tango stopped one. I stopped another. Sheriff's deputies arrested them. That's fact, not memory." The judge leaned forward. "And were you triggered during the incident?" "Yes," Daniel admitted. "But I know the difference between a memory and a knife at a child's throat." The courtroom hushed. Even Pike's supporters shifted uneasily. Judge Keats tapped her pen. "Noted." Then it was Ivy's turn. The bailiff swore her in gently, as if swearing in a butterfly. She perched on the witness chair, button in her lap, eyes darting everywhere but at Clint. Marco crouched beside her. "Ivy, do you know the difference between truth and not truth?" She nodded. "Truth is when it really happened. Not truth is when people want it to. And can you tell us some truth about Clint Avery?" Her lips trembled. Tango padded closer, lying at her feet. She slid her toes into his fur and breathed. He yells at Mommy. He takes the mail. He says Daddy's gone, but Mommy said sometimes papers lie. He scares me." The courtroom went still. Clint's jaw tightened, but his lawyer objected. "Hearsay from a child." Judge Keats overruled. "The child's statements will be considered." Marco smiled softly. "One more question, Ivy. Who makes you feel safe?" She glanced at Daniel, then bent to hug Tango. "Him?" she whispered. "And Button?" The gallery erupted in murmurs. Pike shifted, and for the first time his calm cracked. But victory never comes without sabotage. During a recess, Marco stepped into the hallway for a call. He didn't come back. Minutes stretched. Then a bailiff rushed in, breathless. "Your Honor, Mr. Reyes has collapsed. Ambulance en route. Shock rippled. Daniel's gut twisted. Lena bolted into the hall, returning pale. He's conscious but weak. Said his coffee tasted off. They think poisoning. The judge called order, but the damage was done. Marco's exhibits remained, but his voice, the steady hand guiding the case, was gone. Clint's lawyer seized the moment. Without counsel present, Your Honor, surely these proceedings must be delayed. My client suffers enough under false accusations. Pike's eyes gleamed, triumph curdling behind his mask of piety. Judge Keats hesitated. A continuance may be necessary. Then Ivy's whisper cut through. She clutched Button and whispered louder than she knew. Please don't send me back. The room froze. Even the judge blinked, startled by the raw plea. Tango whined, pressing his head against Ivy's knee. Daniel rose, forgetting procedure. Your Honor, delay only puts her back in danger. We've already had one attempted abduction. If she's released even for a night, we may not see her again. The judge frowned. The court cannot act without due process. Clint's lawyer smiled like a man smelling victory. Pike folded his hands in mock prayer. Ivy sobbed. Daddy's not dead, she whispered, words carrying like sparks in dry grass. They lied. Every head turned. The whisper hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Judge Keats rapped her gavel. Enough for today. We reconvene tomorrow at 9. The child remains in protective custody. Deputies, see them escorted safely. Outside, rain began again, soft but insistent. Daniel led Ivy down the steps, Tango pacing alert. Lena followed, files clutched tight. The courthouse lamps flickered in the drizzle. Poisoning Marco wasn't coincidence, Lena said bitterly. They'll stop at nothing. They already tried taking her twice, Daniel muttered. Next time, they won't fail. At the curb, a car engine revved. Daniel's instincts screamed. He shoved Ivy aside, pulling her against him as a sedan jumped the curb, headlights slicing through the mist. Tango barked, lunged, teeth finding bumper. The impact veered, metal screeching against concrete instead of flesh. Deputies fired at the fleeing car as it fishtailed into the dark. Daniel's heart pounded. Ivy buried her face in his coat, Button crushed between them. Her whisper came muffled but clear. Please don't let us die alone. He closed his eyes, holding her tighter. You won't. Not while I'm breathing. But inside, he knew. Tomorrow wasn't just a hearing. It would be war. Night clung to the riverfront like a bruise. Fog rose off the water in slow curls, softening the bad edges of warehouses that had watched generations lift and fall on their backs. A sodium lamp buzzed over Pier 4, painting everything the color of old honey. Across town, Judge Keats's order kept Ivy in protective custody for one more night. Across town, Pastor Pike's smile did not reach his eyes. Daniel stood behind the municipal building's loading dock, scanning the alley. Tango paced a tight figure 8, checking the scents in the damp air. Oil, rain, hot brake pads, the sharp tang of fear that had lived in his soldier longer than dog years measure. Lena strode up with her hood yanked low, a burner phone in her palm. Anonymous tip, she said, breath fogging. Text pinged the sheriff's line and my work cell. If you want proof Ethan Hale never died, come to Pier 4 before midnight. Daniel weighed it with his body the way he weighed doorways and distances. A lure? Or a whistleblower who knows their time is running out, Lena said. If Pike plans to move everything offshore after this morning's hearing, tonight is their window. Daniel looked toward the third-floor clinic window where Ivy slept under Nurse Morales's watch. He could see the strip of light, the tall shadow of the deputy at the door, a smaller shape curled at the foot of the bed. The dog blanket Lena had snagged from Lost and Found, because Tango couldn't be in two places at once. He felt that ache again, the one that wore his ribs like a collar. Wynne joined them with 2 deputies and a key fob. We go quiet, the sheriff said. If it's a trap, we spring it on our footing. If it's evidence, we bag it. Rourke, Park, you're with me. They drove without sirens, windows cracked to listen, tires whispering over slick streets. Tango stood braced in the back, eyes forward, a black triangle of intent. Pier 4 crouched at the river's elbow, a long rectangle of corrugated siding and broken windows. The overhead door gaped a few inches like a mouth trying to decide whether to speak. Wynne killed the engine and tipped his chin. No heroics. Daniel smoothed a hand over Tango's shoulder and felt the old click of equilibrium, like checking a magazine's seat by touch. Heel, he whispered, and Tango slid against his thigh, breath steady, heart a drummer behind a curtain. Inside, the warehouse was ribs and echo. Pallets rose in dim stacks. A forklift slept with its forks bitten into a crate, stamped with a shipping company that didn't pay taxes here. Near the river door, a folding table held a scatter of office supplies that had migrated into crime. A printer, a laminator, stamps, a laptop, asleep with its eye half open. The overhead fluorescents were off. Bare work bulbs slung low in cages cast lemon cones of light. A figure moved at the edge of the nearest cone, small, hunched, hoodie drawn up. "You came," the figure said, voice tattered. She tugged the hood back. Renee Moore, bruised at the temple, IV tape still shadowing her arm. Lena swore. "How—" Walked out when a nurse turned to answer the phone. Renee's smile was a tear that didn't have to fall. "Phones ring a lot in places where people go to die." Daniel closed the distance, stopping short of touching. "You shouldn't be on your feet." "My feet will outlive my nerve," Renee said. She looked older in the warehouse light, older than she had any right to be at 28. "They're moving it tonight. The papers, the accounts, the images. Pike wants the river to eat what the shredder can't. If you want Ethan's truth, it's on that desk." Wynne motioned to a deputy, who gloved up and woke the laptop with a cautious key press. Files bloomed like a sudden crop. Scans of DD-214, forms with dates that argued with themselves, emails between Pike and Avery referencing continuing, the blessing, and signatures secured. A video thumbnail labeled Hail Depot. Lena clicked the thumbnail. Grainy footage blinked to life. A sunburned man in fatigues at a dusty depot lot, date stamped 3 weeks after the telegram that had told Renee, KIA. A soldier offloading crates glanced up, grinned at the videographer, raised 2 fingers in a peace sign. Ethan Hale, alive when he was meant to be dead. Renee pressed her fist to her mouth, a sound trapped behind it like a bird behind glass. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew it." Wynne was on his radio in a blink. "Keats. DA, I need a sealed warrant for this site and a unit down here yesterday." Static hiccuped. Dispatch promised, and promises in a storm are brave things. The forklift beeped. Not loudly, just a hiccup of power returning where it had been interrupted. Then the bare bulbs went brighter, then blue-white, flaring the edges of the room into shin bones and angles. The river door rolled down with a motor's whine, slamming into its track like a judge's palm. The overhead door banged shut. Metal bolts clacked home on both. Locks slid into places only insiders knew. A voice, amplified mild, floated from the catwalk. "Good evening, Sheriff Wynne." Pastor Gideon Pike leaned on the rail, a silhouette with a microphone like a prayer. At his shoulder, Clint Avery, jaw clenched, hand hovering near a concealed holster. He wasn't as subtle about as he believed. 2 more men melted at the edges, the same volunteers who'd come to pray at the clinic. "You could have come in daylight," Pike continued, strolling along the catwalk with the unhurried gait of a man who believed gravity had exceptions for him. "You could have sat in my office and asked what you needed to ask. But you prefer theater. Others, ruin. The currency of wolves. Funny hearing a sermon from a thief," Wynne said. "The only thing you tithe is widow's grief." Clint barked a laugh, harsh. "You don't understand community, Sheriff. Money's a river. We build the channels. Then tonight the river floods," Lena said, stepping in front of Renee. Pike sighed, and carries away what should never have been dragged into the light. He raised a hand. The forklift coughed awake and rolled toward the folding table, its forks dipping like a predator tasting water. On the far wall, a hissing began, the hungry whisper of gas lines coaxed open. Somewhere, a pilot light waited like a small, patient heart. Tango's nose cut left, then up. His whole body translated fire before the first lick of flame squatted under a desk leg. He whined, a note sharpened by urgency. Daniel read him and was moving before the sheriff finished cursing. Wynne barked orders, deputies to the river door to fight the manual bolts, Lena to bag the laptop, Daniel to get Renee behind cover. The first throw of flame found spilled solvent near a pallet and roared like something glad to, finally, be named. Heat rolled in a low wave. The forklift's forks jabbed the folding table, flipping the laminator and a crate of hard drives toward the widening blaze. Pike's voice floated down, so calm it made Daniel's teeth ache. "You, soldier? Do you know what the Lord says about men of violence? That they live by their sword and die by it." Daniel met the pastor's gaze. "I know what dogs say to wolves when wolves try to eat children." He pointed at Tango. "And my dog knows more scripture than you." Clint drew first. Of course he did. The crack of his pistol slapped the tin roof and fell back into the room like hail. Tango launched before the bullet had a chance at direction. He hit Clint at the shin and then higher, turning bark to bite with a speed that made the world smaller. A second shot sparked off the catwalk rail. Clint lost balance and slammed his ribs into the guard, wind leaving him with an undignified sound. Pike didn't flinch. "Open the river door," he told his men. "Throw it all in." "Then bring me the rabbit." His eyes flicked down toward Ivy's absent form. His mouth twitched when he didn't find her. For the first time, something like calculation bled into urgency. The gas hissed louder. Their plan was to light the evidence, drown what didn't burn, and claim the county had interfered with a holy accounting. Heat licked Daniel's face. He felt sweat instantly, but it wasn't just heat. It was a memory trying to convince him to drown in it. He fought the throb in his ears that turned the forklift's beep into mortar plumes. Tango's weight against his thigh said now, not then. "Renee, move!" Lena hauled the woman toward a stack of pallets that offered shadow. Wynne and his deputies fought the bolts at the river door, muscles and pry bars against steel. The first lock shrieked, the second stuttered, the third held. Pike watched with mild interest. "You can't keep her," he called. "Children belong to the church. Money belongs to the mission. And the soldier belongs to his ghosts." "Not tonight," Daniel said, and his voice filled the bones of the room. The forklift turned toward the river door. Clint, recovered enough to drop to the concrete, had slapped it into gear, eyes dead flat. He aimed the forks for the bolt assembly to shear it, flood the room with river air, and make an exit through smoke. Daniel grabbed a firehook and yanked a chain that released a line of sandbags from the ceiling. Warehouse owners had made concessions to fire inspectors, somewhere between neglect and forethought. The bags fell onto the forklift's hood with meaty thumps. The machine staggered, wheels spinning. The flames leaped from the solvent trail to the pallet wrap, turning plastic into black, oily ghosts that climbed for the rafters. Heat shoved. The air shimmered with the way of worlds about to tip. Renee coughed, eyes streaming, but she held herself upright, like defiance was. Oxygen. Clint toggled reverse and then forward, stubborn as a bad hymn. Tango snarled and jumped again, teeth finding denim and now skin, dragging Clint's aim a degree. It was enough. The forklift clipped the bolt instead of ripping it. The door held fast. Pike sighed into his mic, as if disappointed in technique. Then he drew his own gun. He didn't aim at Daniel, he aimed at Lena. No sermon now, just arithmetic. Daniel's body moved before the calculation finished. He grabbed a tarp and threw it up as he barreled sideways, turning it into a shield big enough for 2 hearts. The shot cracked. The tarp bloomed a dark hole near Lena's shoulder. She flinched, but stayed upright. "You all right?" he barked. "I will be if we live through the next 30 seconds, she snapped. Smoke scissored the room into narrow corridors of sight. Wynne grunted something triumphant. The second bolt gave. Two deputies heaved, shoulders turned into levers, sweat bright. The river door shuddered up 6 inches, then a foot. Night air bit their lungs with cold teeth. The river exhaled, startled to be invited. "Under!" Wynne yelled. "Move!" Tango herded first, he always did, seeing lines of retreat where humans saw obstacles. He shouldered into Renee's thigh, guiding her and Lena toward the gap. Daniel covered, firing 2 rounds at the catwalk, warning, suppression, an old vocabulary. The gun barked and spoke in a voice from another life. Daniel did not let it speak for him. Clint tried once more to be a story's ending. He leaped the last 3 steps of the catwalk and landed badly, ankle-turning. He swung his pistol toward the huddle by the door. Tango met him in a straight line that reduced the world to impulse, protect. The shot went off as teeth closed. Tango yelped, a sound like the world cracking. He stumbled, legs skidding, then gathered himself on will and fury alone and held Clint off with his body as if he could be a wall through which bullets refused to pass. Time stuttered for Daniel, then broke. He tackled Clint hard enough to splinter thought, the 2 men bouncing on concrete like thrown tools. Clint's gun skittered under the forklift. Daniel drove a fist once, twice, a 3rd time, each impact a coin paid for a debt he did not incur but would settle. He might not have stopped, except Tango's whine found him. The dog lay on his side, breath serrated, blood dark at the shoulder. "Go," Tango's eyes said. "Finish it later." "Choose now." The gas ignited in a clean whoop that made the rolling fire into a marching wall. Wynne and the deputies forced the river door as high as a man could crawl without losing a scalp. Lena shoved Renee through on hands and knees. The laptop, wrapped in a jacket, kissed the floor and followed. Smoke poured after like a jealous thing. Daniel scooped Tango, too heavy to carry with elegance, but grief lends strength to busted knees, and staggered to the door. He jammed a shoulder under the metal lip and shoved up another inch. Lena grabbed Tango's hindquarters and pulled. Wynne took the dog's forelegs and dragged. Tango scrabbled, yelped, then slipped free under the door with a messy grace. Daniel looked back once. Pike stood at the catwalk rail, framed by flame, a figure cut out of scripture and sin. Their eyes met. Pike smiled, sad and small, like a man forgiving a child for misunderstanding a parable. Then he turned and walked into smoke, toward a back stair none of them could reach in time. Daniel slid under the door, lungs clawing, eyes streaming. Cold river air slapped him. The night expanded, generous again. Deputies hauled him upright. He stumbled to Tango, dropping to his knees in mud, fingers finding fur, then wound, then pulse. It beat, ragged, belligerent, alive. Renee sagged against a piling, coughing. Lena pressed her own shoulder, grimacing. Wynne radioed a mayday and watched the building succumb, the roof sighing down in embers. Sirens wailed from 2 directions, fire and ambulance, late to a party the town would talk about for decades. In the middle of it all, Daniel pressed his forehead to Tango's, breath naming the dog, promising with each syllable, "Stay, stay, stay." A soft voice reached them through the din. Ivy, pajama-clad, hair-mussed, barefooted, her deputy-escorted sprint from the clinic had ended in a wide-eyed stand at the river's edge. She fell to her knees beside Tango and held his ear the way she held buttons, careful, reverent. "Please," she whispered, the old prayer made new, the plea that had learned to be a command. "Don't leave us." "Don't leave me," Tango's tail thumped once, then twice, then steadier. Daniel's throat closed, hot and wet. He laughed, a broken sound, and let himself cry. Above them, on the steel bones of the bridge that arced the river, a chunk of railing surrendered and fell with a splash, like punctuation at the end of a sentence they had chosen not to obey. Night breathed. Lives continued. The fire ate what it could and left what mattered. And somewhere beyond the smoke, a man who called himself a pastor limped into darkness with a gun hand that had finally learned a tremor it could not pray away. By dawn, the river wore a film of ash that would wash downstream and become someone else's problem. The warehouse smouldered, fire crews feeding its last hungers until they could call it a ruin. Sheriff Wynn's people erected tape and took statements and made coffee that steamed hope back into cold bones. The laptop, miraculously intact inside its jacket, delivered more than anyone expected: full account ledgers, duplicate signatures, a scanned memo from a contractor at the depot confirming Ethan Hale had rotated stateside for a week before a paperwork error returned him to the field. Renee, wrapped in a blanket, stared at the screen and shook her head, not in disbelief, but in confirmation. "I told them," she whispered. "I told them the letter didn't smell right." "Clint said grief made me paranoid." "Grief makes you honest," Lena said. Ambulance medics worked over Tango on the tailgate. Dr. Anika Patel, summoned by some invisible string, arrived in scrubs under a parka, hair braided back like she'd been born to move, while others waited. "Through and through," she said after palpating Tango's shoulder. "No bone hit. We clean, we stitch, we pray to the gods of antibiotics and stubbornness. He'll have a new scar to point at when he brags in dog bars." Daniel exhaled for the first time in hours. He pressed his face to Tango's neck, inhaled smoke and dog and the metallic sigh of blood turning to future. "Good boy," he said, and the words were an altar. Ivy stood with Renee in the morning's brittle light, button against her ribs. Mother and daughter found each other's hands like magnets. Renee cupped Ivy's cheek and cried, not jagged but soft, like rain that the earth had been waiting for. "I'm here," she kept saying, as if repetition could turn a sentence into a house. Later in court, the case did not so much proceed as cascade. Marco Reyes, pale but scowling, rolled in with an IV still taped to his arm and wrath in his eyes. He set the laptop's contents before Judge Keats and watched the defense with the air of a man who had chewed glass and found it disappointing. The DA charged Clint Avery with attempted kidnapping, aggravated assault, fraud, and a buffet of lesser sins. Clint smirked until the bailiff tightened his cuffs a notch more than comfortable. Then he tried a frown that fit his face no better. Pastor Gideon Pike did not appear. A warrant did. When deputies served it at the church offices, they found a back door that had learned to swing only one way. In the sanctuary, the Dove decal peeled further, as if even adhesives knew when to quit a cause. Judge Keats's voice was clean and bright. Temporary custody to county with placement preference to Sergeant Daniel Rourke, pending home study and standard checks. Given the extraordinary circumstances and the child's expressed bond, the court finds good cause to deviate from ordinary sequence. She looked over her glasses at Daniel. "You did not ask for this." "No, Your Honor," he said, standing because he didn't know how to receive anything sitting down. "Sometimes family asks for us," she replied. The gavel tapped once, not like thunder, but like a heartbeat falling into rhythm. Ivy looked up, uncertain, as if adoption papers might explode. Daniel knelt, so his eyes were on the level of her fear. "We'll go one day at a time," he said. "You, me, and a bossy dog." Tango woofed softly, as if to clarify whose name was first on the lease. Lena wept privately in a hallway and then pulled herself together and called 5 agencies and a locksmith. Sheriff Wynn scheduled patrols by Daniel's cabin and set a cruiser to float past the clinic and the school because habits are made from what you survive. A week later, it snowed, a surprise flurry that the weather people blamed on fronts and the town blamed on Grace. Daniel's cabin above the river took the white without complaint. The wood stove chuffed. Ivy built a fort under the kitchen table with 2 blankets and a line of canned peaches. Button stood guard. Tango wore a cone for 3 days and then glared at it so hard Dr. Patel removed it and swore him to a deal about not licking. Renee moved into a rehab unit for a while, close enough to see Ivy daily, far enough to learn how to carry herself again without a hand on her shoulder telling her which way to lean. In a small ceremony with no camera other than Lena's phone and no audience other than people who mean it, Renee signed consent papers for Ivy's placement with Daniel pending adoption. Her hand shook, but her signature was hers and hers alone. Ethan Hale, Lena kept saying in spare hours, her research brain worrying the puzzle. She and Marco pooled contacts and dropped hooks in veteran networks. One day, a message arrived from an old convoy buddy of Ethan's. Saw him at a clinic in El Paso 2 years after his death. Name changed, head not right. Said folks wanted him to stay dead on paper. The trail wasn't warm, but it wasn't ash. It meant the word alive could live in a sentence without apology. The town, which had practiced complicity like a catechism, learned something barked down its throat and then apologized for painting the messenger as a vandal. The first apology came from Mr. Harlan, who stood on Daniel's stoop with a pie that tasted like everything you learned late. "I knew," he said, voice cracked. "Not all of it." "Enough. I told myself it wasn't my place, and then I read the paper and decided it was too late." "I am sorry." Daniel took the pie and the apology and placed them both where they would be eaten. Pastor Pike turned up 3 weeks after the fire in a county 2 lines over, preaching under a tent without the courtesy of a permit. He was arrested halfway through a parable about wolves. The congregation stared with surprise, then lowered their eyes and pretended to pray for him. Some actually did. Grace is weirder than justice and sometimes slower, but it knows its work. The baby things that were not for this particular story, but might have been for another, cribs and tiny shoes from church closets, were redistributed to people who needed them without conditions attached. Money, which is just metal's ghost, was pried out of accounts and returned to the right names, not all of it, but enough to make a winter softer. One evening, when the stove's heat had settled into the walls and snow became patience instead of insistence, Daniel found a hammer, a nail, and a frame. He had printed the coin-sized photo from Button's pocket, blown up now, cleaned as much as grain would allow. The young woman, with wind-tangled hair, the soldier with his cap backward, Renee and Ethan before the world tried to build an altar out of them, and a toddler with cheeks from a miracle store. He hung the photo over the mantel. Ivy watched, blanket fortress forgotten. "Is that us?" she asked, afraid naming it might break it. "It's you," Daniel said. "It's them. It's history being honest." He glanced down. "I put another nail lower." "For what?" He held up a second frame. Inside, a Polaroid Lena had taken on her phone and printed for reasons involving redemption. Tango in the middle with his new scar and ridiculous dignity, Ivy on one side holding Button, Daniel on the other with stove ash on his cheek like war paint, everyone looking at each other instead of the camera. He hung it. The 2 frames made a diptyque of past and now connected by a nail and a decision. Ivy tugged his sleeve. "Can we show Mommy?" "We will," he said. "Tomorrow." They went outside for a minute because snow deserves witnesses. The river wore a thin lace of ice at its edges. The old warehouse foundation downriver steamed faintly where machines poured at debris. Sheriff Wynn's tire tracks rolled past in a lazy S, a promise that someone else was awake too. Lena arrived with a sapling wrapped in burlap. "Got a permit," she said, cheerful with the defiance of paperwork having a good day. "Figured we could plant a tree for the stuff we didn't get to keep." They dug a hole in soil the snow had softened just enough. Ivy pressed a dime-sized daisy charm, snipped from Button's scarf with ceremony, into the bottom like a coin fare for roots traveling underworlds. They placed the sapling. Daniel shoveled earth back, his hands finding a rhythm that felt like prayer. Tango nosed the mound and then sat, supervising. When it was done, they stood quiet, breath-making little clouds, the kind of silence that is not absence but attendance. Inside, by the fire, Ivy curled between Tango and Daniel on the hearth rug. The dog put his chin on her knee. Button lay like a veteran with his own scars. Renee, tired from PT but fierce in the center again, dozed in the rocking chair and woke with that startle that slowly rewires into "you're safe." Ivy traced the scar on Tango's shoulder. You saved us, she said. Tango thumped his tail. He already knew. Daniel stared at the flame, seeing for once not flares and incoming, but heat he could sit beside. Lena handed him a mug that steamed gratitude. Sheriff Wynne texted a picture of Pike in an orange jumpsuit with the caption, "He won't be preaching Wednesdays." Marco sent a thumbs-up emoji because sometimes even men who argue with Latin use cartoons. Snow ticked at the window. The sapling stood outside like a promise that takes longer and is therefore worth more. Ivy's eyes were heavy, but she fought sleep, as children do when the day was good, and they suspect tomorrow might ask too much. She looked up at Daniel, at Tango, at the frames on the wall, the then and the now. "Hey," Daniel said softly. "You remember the first thing you told me?" She nodded. The rabbit's ear brushed her cheek. "I waited," she whispered, voice gentler now, like a story's last line choosing itself. But no one came. She slid her hand into his. "Someone came," she corrected, tears bright but not lonely. "You came." Tango came. "And this is home now." Daniel closed his eyes. The sentence landed like a warm coat on shoulders that had been bare too long. He felt the old ache loosen a notch, the one that had said endings always meant absence. Tango sighed, long and content, letting the room match his breathing. The fire found a new knot in the log and crackled softly, making small stars leap and die in joy. Outside, the tree held a little snow in its tiny crooks and would hold leaves soon enough. The river went on being itself, carrying away what burned, feeding what stayed. And in a cabin where a soldier had been a ghost in his own life, a girl fell asleep between a man and a dog who had decided that saving one person at a time was the only war worth re-enlisting for. "I'm not lost anymore," Ivy murmured, last words dissolving into sleep. "Me neither," Daniel said, no audience required. Tango, whose language has fewer words but more truth, thumped his tail once in agreement and closed his eyes.